we ought to clap afterwards.
Okay. Thank you, Father Michael. I took the opportunity to write this out a little bit, so hopefully it'll go a little bit quicker that way. We're all here because the DSPT is involved in the preparation of leaders, teachers, and preachers. Ad intra and ad extra. And that's what we're here for. Hopefully the students, and we were just chatting with some of the fellows, that, what an inspiring experience to be engaged with the students and to hear your thoughts and perspectives on a variety of things. And I think as fellows, one of our tasks is to find more ways to interact and make that happen. And so I look forward to doing that. Hopefully, from my perspective, as you're discerning where you want to be called after this marvelous academic and spiritual formation, faith formation experience at DSPT, as some of you know because I've been on this case for a while, I'd invite you to consider in the course of your time, even with the rigors of the academic life, continue to research or continue to volunteer or engage in different ministries that the church is doing out there, and practice what you're learning and doing, so it's not all in here. There's this, and plus, we need you in so many places right now, intra and extra. Okay, ad extra and ad intra, we need you out there. The fellows are gathered to support and assist that purpose through engaging the students, and as Father Michael has reminded us, and as we were called together as fellows to bring our differing experiences and our differing professional viewpoints to discuss how we foster a Catholic imagination. And I was thrilled, in this convocation as we began this, in this exploration of Christi Fidelis Laity, that we have been asked in this convocation to begin a reflection on the reality of the laity and the body of Christ moving forward. And this overall issue could not be more timely. And I wanted to remind myself as I was sitting there, and we get lost in the moment, that we do this with hope and excitement. It's the Lord's work, it's not ours. And we don't have to play the game of, that's prevalent in our overly, shall we say, tactile American experience, pragmatic experience where, we have to reach some magic number over here in order to feel like we're successful. We're successful because we're faithful to the call and we're responding as best we can, and the Spirit's inviting people to come into this moment, and that we're enjoying and doing what we're doing. But this overall issue could not be more timely. So many wonderful insights and perspectives have been shared, so many, and I was sitting there reflecting, saying, wow, it's like sort of comes at you like a big wave after a while, and so I'm going to surf that one, or I'm going to swim that one, or am I just going to let it go by, and so it just keeps coming at us along the way. Father Michael began by probing the document to point out the operational imagination that may be happening within our church, and I think most of us validated that, and we saw the tension that's perhaps in the document itself as Father Michael laid it out, but it certainly is in the lived reality of our church here in the United States, the care of the souls. And every one of us who's in a parish and knows that, we resonated with that, and the delegated authority to the laity within that context to assist the pastor in the care of the souls there, to hopefully, strengthen, to hopefully bring vitality and life to the body of Christ in the world. And then the second piece was that intrigues me all the time, because that was my profession, was sort of fostering the mission, that the church is a mission to evangelize, and we all know that, we understand it, and yet many of us in the room live ad intra. We live there. And that's where we know and where we comment and where we want to see success, and we want to see everything hunky-dory and looking wonderful and doing wonderful. And sometimes I forget it's ad extra, and so that's been a really helpful reflection here to remind us of what we already know. And a lot of times, we leave it to the special groups and occasionally to the parish or the inspired parish or the diocesan church. We shared a lot of insights that invite us to constantly recognize the cultural reality within which the church lives and exercises its ministry. And I'm not going to repeat all those, and Paolo and others did a great job of commenting on the cultural reality in which we find ourselves right now. This is probably, and I think I've said this once before, sometime, someplace here, this is probably the most powerful evangelizing force in the world at the moment. I mean, everywhere. I mean, this particular culture, has people's imaginations, aspirations, hopes, dreams, what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, and all the vehicles at its disposal to make that happen. And there's some beautiful aspects of that culture. And, sometimes we get a little bit negative and focused on the downside of that. And I'm not criticizing, Dr. Carozzo, but, your presentation is where I usually go all the time. And I was reminding myself, in our future, where we go with this, let's take a few moments to look at the culture itself, recognizing those deleterious effects of the culture on the preaching of the gospel and the challenges it presents. But let's also spend a little bit of time taking a look at what are the gifts that this culture offers. And I think we saw some glimpses of that in what Anthony was talking about and what Elizabeth was talking about in terms of some of the gifts of our Catholic teaching as it interacts with that culture and some of the gifts that are out there. And so I think we need to take a little bit of a look at that. We began the discussion of clarifying that the laity are co-responsible for the care of souls and share those delegated responsibilities we talked about to keep that body healthy and functioning in the world. But I think I took away from it the laity is front and center in the evangelizing mission because we are the church. And we have the laity has the opportunity to provide this kind of witness. The role of the clergy, and I think we spent some time getting somewhere between talking about my particular negative parish experience, and we never really got to talking about the role of the clergy in terms of what they do. And I think as we move forward, that's something we could spend a little bit of time focusing on, because I think the clergy has a significant role in inviting the encounter with Christ in the Eucharist, in the liturgy, in the sacraments, in the preaching, and inviting. Once they can see and they know that experience is happening, how do they facilitate that within the parish experience? And I think we could talk a little bit about that. And most importantly, and sort of a little thing I like to harp on, most importantly, formation. Because once the laity encounters Christ and feels like I have to put that mission into, I have to be engaged there, how do we provide the formation necessary for someone to do that so that I think, as one of our speakers said, they continually encounter Christ. They continually encounter Christ, and the richness and the beauty of what surrounds them unfolds and supports and encourages and transforms them and continues that, that conversion process. So I think I'd like to spend a little more time talking about that aspect of it in the future, that role of the clergy and how we define that. And I don't want to get lost there, because there's a whole other piece that we can talk about, and Gil and I were just chatting, and I think he's going to talk a little bit more about the ad intra a little bit, aren't you, Gil? Yeah. Okay, good. What we all agreed upon is the need to build the imagined roles of the laity, extra and intra-church, on that personal encounter with Christ. There are so many diverse opportunities to encounter Christ in the Spirit. And, we could go into all of those, but, we got glimpses of them all as we were here. And I think whenever we grasp this topic again, we need to always center ourselves there, and try and discern together what are the things that are facilitating that. Not what is the thing, because the personal encounter with Christ can be very personal. It can be very heady. It can be very artistic. It can be in the experience of sorrow. It can be in so many things that are our experience as a human person. And so we don't want to presume that it's if we could do these four things right, everybody would encounter Christ. But we can discern together in this particular cultural moment what things are somewhat more effective than others. And I would throw out there, jumping ahead in my thing, I would throw out there a couple things that I'm involved in at the moment. The bishops of California wrote a magnificent letter that I don't know how many people ever saw on mental illness. On mental illness. And, what is the church's role in bringing about mental wellness? And what's our role in doing that? Well, the resonance of that with all sorts of people, some of whom are Catholic and work within the institutions, is really nice. The response from pastors was astounding, as they confronted mental illness in their communities. But we didn't move the next step to talk to the laity. And that's one of those evangelizing moments. That's one of those times when people encounter Christ. So I throw that out as not that we have to dwell on that, but just as an example. End of life. As this whole generation of people ages out, like me, and gets to that moment, these are the issues where the encounter with Christ becomes very real, and laity are drawn into that particular moment, and there are opportunities for evangelization, etc. And I just single out a couple of those, but there's so many, whether it's, and some of our parishes are doing that, but not all. Poverty, homelessness, but what are the moments in our particular communities? I'd like to spend some time taking a look at that. We began a discussion of the competency of the laity. We noted that the laity have the opportunity to provide witness, stories, experiences, prayer, and I would say we didn't spend a lot of time on prayer. I mean, we prayed, but we didn't spend a lot of time focusing on prayer, and it's sort of graced lifeblood that is part of this whole element here, and so I think we could spend a little bit of time focusing on that as we move into the future. We heard the excellent panel on the movements and the invitations to follow their encounter with Christ over and over again through their using their unique talents in so many areas. We spent some time talking about business, and it's such a beautiful panel that we all affirm. Law, art, teaching, healing. There's so many ways that we encounter Christ, and movements have come forward to do that. And I was really thrilled with the exploration of those movements, because I was sharing with Bishop Soto, I have some history with all of those movements and value them and think they're such marvelous vehicles. But in my world, I'll just pick the Hispanic community in California. In my world, the Hispanic community was predominantly involved in what we call movimientos, which are much smaller and are basically most of the time involved with the care of souls. Not about the proselytization or the preaching of the word out there. They're involved in the care of the souls, and that's a source of tension for a lot of the leadership within the church, because that's my role. And so there's a need, as Bishop Soto was sharing with me, there's a need for more dialogue and conversation. And so I think as we explore what emerged in those movements, let's broaden that conversation into the movimientos. Because a lot of the Hispanic Catholic folks who go to church that I deal with in California over my time, they're in these movimientos, or the cursillo, marvelous cursillo, or they're an IAF, or PICO, or something that puts their faith in action by expressing the community organizing in their particular community. And there's a real challenge we're struggling with there. Are those organizations extensions of our Catholic experience? Or if they're not, how do we work hand in hand to inform and form the people who are part of those? And so I'd like to continue, and I think one of the things we need to look forward to is building on what we did so well today on the movimiento, or the movements, and expand that and ask a lot of the questions that lead us that direction from ad intra and ad extra. And so where do we go from here? Let's discern the roles and responsibilities. Let's continue to explore the reality of those movements, as I was talking about just a moment ago. And what can our lay leaders and clergy and institutions do to facilitate the invitations and the opportunities for the laity to own their mission? I was sitting here thinking to myself, so if I was a pastor, how would I encourage my parishioners to be part of Focolare? Just to pick one of them, I'm not picking that out. I know the bishops encourage people to be part of the Knights of Malta in many cases, in many situations, or the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre, or the Knights of Columbus, and there's all the traditional organizations that have these marvelous histories. What's the role and the responsibility of the leadership, our lay and clergy leadership, in doing that? It was sitting in the back of my mind over here that if we ever get to it, what's our responsibility to tap the resources we have to do better public relations? To really get to people where they're at, and I don't mean going crazy, but we don't do a really good job of public relations. We don't, and yet we're supposed to be informing and bringing people forward. So we could talk a bit about that as we went forward. Focus the questions, discern the roles, responsibilities, and opportunities to create more co-responsibility among the laity and the clergy. Follow the prompting. I'd like to follow the prompting of the Spirit in, probably not a good way to say it, the clergy crisis. Let's face it, there's not a diocese in this state, in this country, that has a clergy adequate to the people that are there. Not one. Not one. That's an opportunity for bishops to have a conversation about how do we best use the clergy we have, how do we create an environment in which we're inviting people into something they want to join, and how do the lay people fully move forward in that. I think we could come up with some strategies as leaders around that to prompt that conversation. And the clergy sex abuse crisis that I mentioned, as I said, I think there's a humility that is emerging in many of the bishops about the fact that there's a better way to do this. And that's co-responsibility. It's imagining. And so we're into that particular moment. How can we use the engagement that I've mentioned with all sort of the issues that are out there? Christ will invite us, and I'm confident of that. I'm hopeful of that. I'm excited about that. I'd really like to end with spending the time on formation. I think and it may not be the next one we do, but at some point we really need to talk about what's your role, what's your role, what's your role, what's my role, as lay and really co-responsible for the formation, not waiting to have it delegated to us. And there are some great models out there. I'm touting that horn, but what we've done, at least on the West Coast in Catholic healthcare and formation, if you saw it, you wouldn't believe it. Catholics sitting there, after going through a program for 3 years, of 3 to 4 times a year for, 2 or 3 days and a retreat, saying to you, why didn't anybody ever tell me this is what we were about? Catholics, professional people who, fully invested their lives in doing, and, they felt called to this Catholic healthcare, but now through the formation, they understand, boy, I didn't have a clue what I was doing here. Now I really know that. And the people who aren't Catholic, they're saying, oh my God, am I proud to be part of this? And the Spirit calls some people to step aside. Say, oh, I didn't know it was about that. I'm out of here. That's okay. That's where we're at, and that's where we go. Let's continue to engage this issue, the issue of the laity in the church. Let's explore who else should be part of this conversation. The last thing I'd say, I'd like to invite the students, and I was sharing with Gil and a couple others that it would be fun to, as we put it together, using the type of things that we have nowadays with the virtual FaceTime and online or whatever. Let's have the students integrated into the panels with us, and vice versa. And so we can do that together and deepen the dialogue, if you will. And I think that'd be a lot of fun. Thank you very much. Let's go do it.